Bry. Welcome to another episode of the Aetherica Podcast. Here with Ike Baker. How's it going, Ike?
Good. How are you?
Good. Today we're going to be covering your new exciting book, A Formless Fire. How do you feel about that?
I feel good about that because I asked you to do this.
First question I wanted to ask is the title, A Formless Fire. Tell me about why you chose that name. Is there some sort of significance to that? Does it have some meaning behind it? Um, what's up with the title?
Yeah. Well, I never do anything arbitrarily. Um, I would say so essentially it is a phrase used throughout theurgy, particularly in the Chaldean Oracles. Um, and it is used in a couple of times in the fragments that we have. And it's one of the things that I was reading while right at the outset of the project was a couple of different books. Philosophy as a Rite of Rebirth, Philosophy and Theurgy, a couple of other titles by Alghisus Divinis, which if you're familiar with Theurgy, you're going to know who that is, especially nowadays. His work has gotten much more popular, particularly, somebody like Danny Newman
Is that a modern author or is
no,
that
I believe he died decades ago, but he was an academic who was kind of on the fringes, I would say in the 1960s, I believe, and 70s. I could or 1950s and 60s. So he was kind of ahead of his time, but the price you pay for that, you know. So it's really now in the last maybe like 10, 15 years that but particularly in the last 5 years that his works are really getting uh the acclaim that they deserve. Some of it sounds like it's astounding that he's an academic and that he decided to write this stuff. It sounds like the ramblings of an insane man. But there's certainly some poetic inspiration, some mantia, behind the divine madness. I certainly see that behind what he says. But anyway, he talks about how this was an epithet for the early theurgists to refer to Hecate, the
Hmm.
goddess of magic. Um, Obviously, that being derived from the Egyptian Heka, the god of magic in ancient Egypt. So, uh, anybody that's familiar with Golden Dawn work, particularly in the I would say higher grades, Philosophists and higher, they're going to be familiar with the Formless Fire. It's introduced as a Chaldean formula in the Golden Dawn work, or even a fire formless, whence cometh the image of a voice. So these, I want to say, canticles, these verses of fragments of the modern, or I would say what we consider the Chaldean Oracles today. We don't have the Chaldean Oracles. People refer to them as if it's for granted. It's not. Yeah, we don't have the Chaldean Oracles. We have fragments of what uh, later practitioners, philosophers, theurgists um, they referenced the Chaldean Oracles, and they would say these lines and sort of talk about the book. And so those fragments that we have of them talking about the Chaldean Oracles is what we consider the Chaldean Oracles. And of course, William Wynne Westcott, one of the founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, translated those Chaldean Oracles, and it's a big part of the later Golden Dawn work because you're preparing for theurgy. And why did I choose this? And I some people have come to me and have really one person. One person has come to me and understood what I meant by the formless fire. Uh, and what that means. That person's David Chaim Smith. He's the only person who's understood it. Uh, just from the title alone. And I'm not going to go into that. I think that's something that has to be something. It has to remain something that people will parse and figure out for themselves and kind of have insights about. You will have greater insights about it in practice than you will in reading, by the way. It doesn't matter how much you read about what the formless fire is. Shaw talks about it in his book, but he's written several now, but Theurgy and the Soul. But the experience of it is completely different. And so why did I name it that? Well, because as you read in the opening, Apologia, where I state the two theses of the book. The first is that the Western esoteric traditions, as they come down to us from stem or from seed to stem to flower, are initiatic and theurgic. We're dealing with theurgy here, and a lot of people don't understand that. They don't have the historic context. They don't have the spiritual experience of those types of initiations. Most people are only ever working with, there's two type of people interested in the Golden Dawn. And it seems like people who never get past the outer order, or maybe like the Zalater grade of the outer order. It doesn't matter if you've read all the rituals, in your understanding, you can't get much further. And then there's people who just kind of, enjoy the history and focus on the Enochian, and by way of a kind of de-purism, if you can even call it that. But there's not many people who understand that the Golden Dawn has always meant to be something that was, albeit a reconstruction, I think an extremely successful one if you're practicing that magic, but it's meant to be a reconstruction, preservation, and transmission of theurgy. And where do we find this? Well, obviously it's throughout the Golden Dawn, but the thing is that you won't get a direct sense of it from the outer order because it was meant to be hidden from you. It's meant to be this massive aha reveal, the curtain pulls back, we're Rosicrucians, and we've just been waiting for you, it's kind of, we've been training you. The Golden Dawn is an outer court. And this is it. The capstones of the mysteries are Christian in nature, right? That's what the Rosicrucians were. One of their axioms, Yeshua mihi omnia, Jesus or Yeshua my everything. That from the earliest documents, which you can find preserved perfectly in the flying rolls of the Inner Order of the Golden Dawn, multiple of the adepts, including the founders, are explicitly saying what we are practicing is theurgy. Everything else is ancillary. It's supplementary. What we come here to do is the divine theurgy. And so, that is, I think that we suffer from, in a lot of ways, a misreading of magical currents. And obviously, thank you very much, Edward Alexander Crowley, for having a huge part to play in that. It's just the truth. I watched something today, this interview with this dude who said that Crowley was the Einstein of magic. Everybody before him, basically, it was all these disparate parts. And when it reached him, he turned it on its head. Yeah, but that's not a good thing. He didn't turn it on its head in a good way. He inverted it and perverted it, and he usurped the true vine, the sine qua non, the reason for the season. And so I wanted to make a statement of sort of rediverting our attention back to, no, look, I've done 500 pages, hours of research on everything, alchemy, and practice, even more than that, so much practice in these systems. And I wanted to to really make the statement very firmly in every section of this: alchemy, astrology, divination, what have you, Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, Hermeticism. That's why I covered everything. That it was meant to be initiatic and theurgic. So no solo practitioners reading out of books, no grimoire tradition, no goetic magic compacts with, although I cover that. I cover the grimoire and contractual based magic, but that's not the purpose. And some people are gonna be like, so what? And that's fine. My book's probably not for them. But I think for beginners need a definitive statement that is going to orient them correctly. And the only bias that I have, truly, is that I've experienced this, and it has proven itself to be such. And not only is it verifiable by a trajectory of theurgic ritual praxis, but it is also verifiable in the extant historical documents which provide us overwhelming context and affirmation that this is the case.
I want to ask you, is there anything that, is there any insights? I know you've mentioned for as much criticism as you've given, fairly so, to Crowley. You have mentioned there's, a decent book or two of his, but is there anything that Crowley has made available in terms of original ideas that can't be found elsewhere? And, just it's something that he gave. Is there anything that he has put out there, or has it all been derived from other sources and just compiled in a unique way? Or like, is there anything he offered?
No one. So here's the thing. It's a lot like music, these traditions, or cooking. You cannot invent any new ingredients. You can just put them together in a way that is unique to you. It's the same thing with music. Uh, Everyone's only imitating, no matter how original you think yourself to be. If you go there and you record bees, and then I don't know, some kind of Tibetan throat singing, it'll still in some way be derivative. So in that sense, there cannot be any unique or original contributions. There can be personal gnosis, personal insight, but that's for you. That's not for the world. And I think that's the thing that Crowley did that stands out the most. He confused the God of his microcosm with the God of the world. And um he introduced a so essentially you have this idea of, it's kind of reductive, and it's based on this binary, this black and white, good and evil, right? We know that there's a lot of gray area. The Golden Dawn sought to preserve the tradition in the gray area, but not, tending towards balance, tending towards equilibrium, tending towards a kind of spiritual dynamic equilibrium, right? In this realm, nothing is truly static, but trying to, like we say, left-hand path, right-hand path. Golden Dawn is a middle path system. If you're looking at obviously these terms are derived in Vedic forms of spirituality, which a lot of people don't know. They don't understand that. Left-hand path is not referring to, the left pillar of the tree of life. As a matter of fact, when you back into the tree of life, you're doing the tree of life in the anatomy and in the sphere of sensation. It's actually the tree of the left hand, the pillar on your left side is the one of severity. Of mercy. The one capped by chokmah and chesed. So that's kind of a misnomer in the first place, but it's worked its way into modern vernacular. A lot of occultists think it's the left versus the right pillar, left hand, right hand. It's not the case. But for the sake of this colloquialism, we say that the Golden Dawn system is a middle pillar system. And I think that Crowley, right? They say that the devil. There's an old saying, right? Just this folky sort of axiom that says the devil is the imitator of God. And I felt like that is the part that Crowley played, the imitator of the Golden Dawn. He stole and mutilated the system so that it would tend toward. He essentially created an order that was a mirror image of himself, something he was at war with the darkest parts of himself, and rather than attempt to follow the lead of those that had trained him, because he was so disillusioned with them, he decided to take a snapshot of his spirit and time and turn it into an egregore. This is why we see so much division and an obsession with counterculturalism and the breaking of taboos, because this is who he was. Rather than attempt to resolve these things, he left them unresolved and decided, I'm going to create a magical order anyway. He didn't contribute anything. It wasn't the true will was not his idea. The true will is taken from the Golden Dawn sort of Kabbalistic divisions of the soul, which they kind of misattribute. They misname it as the part Sufim, but they consider it the parts of the soul, and that the neshama, being the yehida, Kia, and neshama, being a general term to refer to those three supernal aspects of the Kabbalistic model of the self. That is the highest aspiration of the soul and what we would consider the true will. Crowley didn't make that up. He stole it. And, even do what thou wilt. That whole thing, and Thelema, it comes from a Rabelais work. Nothing he did was even remotely unique. The thing is, he's got a lot of sycophants. And if you look at them, they're all the same. They wear black clothes. They were all always in metal bands or some shit like that. Something, it's the same aesthetic, because they go down the path of therapeutic blasphemy and they become mired there. It's an aesthetic. It's a trend. They're in love with their own image of being the divine iconoclast, and society will hate me because I choose to be the dark horse because that's where the light is. It's bullshit. It's juvenile 16-year-old bullshit. But how are you going to see it if that's where you're at? So my book isn't for those people. They make a lot of noise and they hang out in their own little fucking echo chambers. My book is for people that are getting started and don't want to go down that path.
I think it was you who told me, didn't Crowley, was it like a diary entry or something? He said he wanted to kill Mathers. Was it Mathers or something?
Yeah, he wanted to kill Mathers. He actually records summoning Beelzebub to go to attack him, and he writes in his diary about he reminds himself to find someone to do the job. He was a very unstable young man, which is why he was denied entry into the 5=6. I've spoken to a lot of people about this. I mean, foremost among them, perhaps Tony Fuller, the greatest living Golden Dawn historian at this time. And he's given me a tremendous amount of information and documents that kind of prove that Crowley was never initiated into the 5=6.
Wow.
Yeah. Mathers might have done what we call bonking on the head, conferring by scepter. I hear you go, but he didn't go through the proper formula. And it says a lot. I mean, his development was completely botched at the outset because he was a man of extremes. He would dedicate himself to fervent prayer for a month and spiritual exercises, and then go spend 3 weeks in a brothel, and unwind all that shit. He couldn't deal with the psycho-spiritual tensions. And I don't begrudge him that, because I have difficulty with that too as an addict. These things, essentially, you're working with psychosexual energies. And yeah, they're good. The more you stimulate them and you do not sublimate them, they hang out in the body and they give you sexual urges and all this stuff. And it's one of the most dangerous things about magic. Um, Particularly initiatic magic. You have to have a very, very firm hold on your and understanding about your own psychology and sexuality, and a discipline, so that and everybody says, well, Crowley, the idea of free love probably comes from him, and others. He was an intrepid, poetic, misunderstood spirit. That might be the case, but he also was obsessed. You have Dion in the age when we were trying to come to terms with human sexuality because we were in magical circles. We were discovering that it was the power, the motive force behind magic. You had a couple of different camps. You had Moina Mathers, who refused to discuss it, didn't want to talk about it. She'd expel people from the Alpha at Omega. She claims to never have had sex. In her private letters to Annie Horniman, she claims to never have had sex with her husband.
Damn.
Just kind of looking at it as a disgusting, and then you've got Crowley, who's like, no, it's all good, it's natural, and all this stuff, and he bends towards hedonism. And then Dion Fortune, who I like her take the most, is yes, we need to remove the repression and the stigma from sex without becoming obsessed with it. You don't want to continually ground by having an orgasm. You want to redirect the forces and upward and utilize them in the way in which magic trains you to utilize them. What do you think healing power is? What do you think, that manifestation, that energy that enables us to control the elements? It's psychosexual. Like God creates, we also create. The sexual impulse at its core is a creative impulse. It's actually not a love impulse. It's a creative impulse. We glorify and we sublimate the creative impulse when we gratify it physically in love. But that is not what its expression is. Sex is not an expression of love. It's an expression of creation. We want to create. And so we have been blessed with that gift, many of us, and you can utilize that energy for anything. It can be magic. You could put it towards music. You could put it towards your work. You could put it towards literature. I mean, there's a vast amount of research covering this stuff. The technique is called sublimation. It's been used in psychology and new thought and all that kind of stuff. But he didn't really, he couldn't control himself, and he certainly didn't do anything new. He just did it in a way that we as postmodern people admire, because we are bored with our lives, with everything that came before us. We are jaded. We are cynical. Why? Because we've been mired in this myth, right? Myths are the most powerful things that a people, whether that's a town, or whether that's a family, or whether that's a country, or whether that's a planet. The myths are the sacralizing of all actions. If something doesn't have a myth, it is not sacred, because that means it wasn't given to us by the gods. And the myths that we have consumed over the last 10 years have probably more have been the myth of the anti-hero. That's the archetype we have attached ourselves to. The anti-hero. So not a likable character, a dark horse character who teeters on the edge, the anti-hero. It blurs the line. And you say, well, that's more realistic. It's just more realistic. It might be more realistic because we become shittier people. That's something to think about too.
Yeah. So is Beelzebub a demon? Is he... I know there's the book by Gurdjieff. It's Tales from Beelzebub to his grandson or something like that. I don't know if that's even related or not, or if he just chose that name. I thought it was a cool book, but is like
Yeah, I mean,
Beelzebub.
it depends on, yes, it depends on who you ask. In traditional, I would say Abrahamic religious lore, yes, but you got a whole group of people out there who now, for some reason, believe that either demons aren't real or they're the old gods. They're the pre-Christian old gods that have been vilified. But yeah, in short, it's a demonic entity.
Are some are
Prince
some
of demons.
what?
The prince of demons.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are some diamonds conflated with demons? Um, this was something I think you might have like mentioned something about this in your latest Theurgy episode, and it was something I was curious about lately. Are is our understanding, because I know the word, I think diamond, does it come etymologically from demons or something? But is there conflation on the opinion of whether or not all diamonds are all diamonds like quote unquote good, or are some of them like demons or demonic, or you know what I mean?
Well, are you asking from experience or are you asking from a
I
historical standpoint?
Both historical, experientially. Yeah, I guess like
Yes, the word demon is etymologically derived from daimon.
oh, okay, it's the other way. Okay.
Right, because daimon is the older word, right? It's a,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
Greek, it's ancient Greek, which was meant to just in some way refer to a mediating spirit, an intermediary spirit. Um, in many cases, a tutelary spirit, sort of a psychopomp and a guide. Uh, but one that particularly mediated was an intermediary um, between the mundane and the divine. Uh, yes, the word demon is derivative from that, directly so. So you get a lot of people that will say, "Oh, okay, they were daimons before," or really in Greek, daimonis. They were daimonis before. Now in the Christian era, they're demons. Well, that's reductive. And again, it seems that kind of like reductive kind of dismissal, it seems so satisfying to the people that keep repeating it. It seems like they just keep pulling they feel like they're pulling a trump card and smirking, like they're holding aces, you know. But when you look at it historically, the Theurgists agreed there were good daimonists and there were bad daimonists. Right? There were Agathodaimonis, the guides of good counsel, and
Uh,
Kakodaimonis, the guides of bad counsel. And so everybody wants to paint this thing with one brush. Either they're all good or they're all bad. Right? It's like everything else in life. The truth is in the middle. It's in between. And that's also, I would say, verified personal gnosis. Um, and along with the teams of practitioners that I work with regularly have experienced this. In Golden Dawn magic, rare that you interact with these things. On the other hand, not something I talk about very much, but I'll talk about it here and now. I'm also, an initiate of the Elu Cohens, and that our job there is to work with those things and in several capacities, but primarily in exorcism and in binding and exorcism, specifically getting them to leave. And so, yeah, they're not what I will say about the majority of daimonis, demons, whatever you want to call them, is that they're either neutral or duplicitous. We will never be able to know. The Chaldean Oracles, the fragments that we have reference this. They talk about the dog-faced demons that never show true form to mortal gaze. We're at a severe disadvantage when we're working with them because we have to enter, even in a manifestation to visible appearance, we are still relying on some form of astral gateway image. There is nothing commanding that they be honest. It's so interesting to me that a lot of these, like the goetic practitioners and stuff, very cynical about human nature. That the ones that I've interacted with and I would say most occultists, well, on either side, very cynical about human nature. So you're cynical about humans, but you seem to be perfectly fucking fine with something that you can't see, that you're summoning from some, bowel realm. you know, you have to cajole and get his, his commanding officer to get him to come up, and it's like you're perfectly fine with that. And the whole thing is it's Faustian, it's Faustian. Paul Foster Case talks about it in his personal correspondence with Israel Regardie. You can see it anywhere. When you make pacts with spirits, you may get everything what you want in this life. You may never see a day of hardship. May never see a day of strife and struggle, but you have no idea what is waiting for you on the other side. It is in a lot of these applications, you are likely binding yourself as a post-mortem servitor to whatever is working for you, quote unquote, now in this life. It's a long con.
Yeah. Something you mentioned to me a few times is that thing that you had just mentioned about personal insights being for the individual and not the world to share. You said this in regards to Crowley, but I think you've also said this in regards to other people. Um,
I
and so
consider it a rule.
I wanted to ask you, like, uh, how do we assess what's for ourselves and what's for the world? Like what if we have some inspiration or some, um, I don't know, experience or vision or whatever, how are we to determine whether that's something that we keep to ourselves or may not be beneficial to the world?
Well, there's a couple of answers that are important there. First, you should never be your only goal before interacting with, I would say, various intermediaries. It's one thing to do the LBRP, right, and call in via astral, gateway images and that kind of thing, to call in a portion of an archangelic power. That's a totally different thing than communing with an archangel. That they're two different things. I would say like in kind, but different in magnitude. Before you undertake any actual kind of communion with anything else, you should be striving to have communion with the highest part of your spiritual architecture, which you are able to come into contact with. And in the Golden Dawn system, this is the higher divine genius. Genius being the word that Thomas Taylor translated out of daimon. He knew better than to translate it as demon because he understood that was not the fitting. It didn't bear the context which was appropriate for this application. So he wrote, if you read Thomas Taylor's works, he called it the genius or the genii. And so the founders of the Golden Dawn adopted this and said, okay, this is what we have to get in touch with, our own personal higher divine genius. Is that the holy guardian angel? Depends on who you ask. I tend to think that they are different entities, similar, some way connected, but not identical. But that is your task. That should be your task. You even look at it in the Abramelin ritual. It's the same formula. You need to prepare yourself and get in touch with your holy guardian angel, if that's the verbiage you want to use, before you begin summoning things, because that is how you know anything. It's the same thing. You read it in the Socratic dialogues too. Socrates, his daimon told him what not to do. And it was in heeding his daimon that he was able to learn things, discover things, and live in a particular way, which was providential, which was of the gods. And we still talk about him, right? 2,500 years later. And that should be what you're doing. Golden Dawn magic is very, very, and I think all forms of, higher magic will have a preoccupation with this kind of spiritual hygiene, because the biggest danger is delusion early on, particularly, but it doesn't really end. You're never really 100% safe from deluding yourself. So you're taught to test everything, to do things, to execute spiritual sort of interfacing in a sequence, a trajectory that makes the higher divine genius the first and foremost, the utmost. Right? We're always invoking the highest first. That's a major axiom of Golden Dawn magic. We don't plug in somewhere along the stream. We go to the highest possible, the source, the henad of whatever it is, the root, the foundation, and then invoke downwards. And that's the same protocol you should be taking. Now, what happens is when you become linked into these spiritual things, you understand that the wash dry cycle of the world is just it and a lot of people are not going to like this, but it's just what it is. A lot of this volley is just pointless. The way to save you focus on the microcosm first. The way to save the world is save yourself. You need to focus on improving yourself, knowing more about yourself, coming into possession and gnosis, right? Experiential knowledge of your own spiritual, pneumatic, psychic, and I don't necessarily only mean in psychic, ESP and things like this, but because that's, again, we're not talking about mediumism in magic. It's totally different. Mediumism is passive. Magic is active psychism. We exert the will and we strategically select the things that are going to allow us to have guardrails on what we're doing. It's very, very hyper specificity allows us to select the correspondences, to select the entity, and go out and attempt to make some sort of contact there. Whereas, so this, and then you learn methods to test that thing, and see as best to your abilities, see if it is what it says it is. Mediumism is becoming open and blank, and whatever happens, happens, and you're trusting all the imagery. Some people would say, well, it's tested against my intuition, and I don't know. But we use those hyper focused guardrails. That's a major part of magic, and essentially, you are working on the microcosm when you're doing that. You're activating those powers to stimulation. You're coming to know those powers, and you're communing with those powers in the exterior world, at least, in the astral and the etheric portions. Now, I think it's a different thing to feel inspired by a message and then to execute that message. If you find that you have some sort of spiritual mission in this world that you need to execute, well, you should test that. I would say that you should first and foremost be, if you receive this mission outside of work with the highest part of your spiritual architecture, outside of working with the higher divine genius, the holy guardian angel, I would say to be extremely skeptical of it. Now, if you find it, if this is delivered to you while you're working with your higher divine genius or holy guardian angel, you should also be extremely skeptical of it. But that relationship is something you build. And if this thing keeps repeating itself, it will eventually manifest in your life so that you have no way to avoid it. So you go about and you continue every move based on the promptings of the thing that set you to work, which shouldn't be you. It should be your higher divine genius. It's communicating to you. And so the highest part of your spiritual architecture, personally, that is what you need to check in with. And you don't go and tell the world, this is what my higher divine genius says, and this is what it considers truth, and this is what it's telling me to do. You just do the work. And obviously you get out into the world, and some tact is required. You can't, you need to be able to work within your own sphere of influence. How much can I alone accomplish? Again, how much of me am I subconsciously inserting into this process? It's bound to happen, but you got to control that. And then you look and you see, is what I'm saying, like you mentioned before, is what I'm saying in harmony with the general traditions that I have become a part of? So now, if I had my higher divine genius tell me something, and I received some sort of communication in words or images or both, and I went out and it seemed to contradict every piece of historical evidence, every piece of spiritual evidence that I could possibly find, well, then I may abandon the project. I will say, okay, I got to work on this. I got to make sure this is coming through. But when there's certain synchronicities and you find yourself in harmony, in stream, in flow with, the spiritual voice of the ages, well, then maybe you're onto something. But even then, it's not. It's just the part of your spiritual architecture that can commune with you, telling you to fall in line with what already is. I didn't, we don't make this shit up. We don't make up all this stuff, but we can at times find ourselves in flow with it. And when we're in flow with it and we look back and we have the voices of the ancient past and even the more recent past in agreement with the general tone, tenor, telos of what is going on, then I think we can feel at least justified in putting one foot in front of the other and continuing the work day to day. But you don't go out there and say, I have discovered the new dispensation, right? That's what Crowley did. I am the prophet of the new eon. That is ego aggrandizement. In order to be exalted, you must be humble.
So Rudolf Steiner, do you feel like he was in flow and in contact with his diamond and checking in with that in regards to like his publications and his lectures? Was he following his telos, or do you feel like, that was irresponsible of?
I'll say this. I've thought a lot about this kind of stuff. What I said earlier is the point most apropos. Do I think he was in connection with something higher spiritually? Yes. Do I think every message that came through was by way of his higher divine genius? Absolutely not. What do I find to be his major problem? Well, what I mentioned before, how much of me is coming through? In the Kabbalistic model, we call something the ruach of the individual, right? It's the lower six sephirot, exclusive of Malkuth. So it's that hexagram, that planetary hexagram of the individual. I would say from Hesed, Gebura, Tifereth, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. So those two triangles, that's the Ruach. What is that? That's the internal person. That's the persona, the emotions, the deep mind, the superficial mind, the essential parts that come together to create the flower of the person. That is the persona. Everything that comes down to the individual person. And it's the Ruach isn't just the persona, it's the much, much deeper parts of the psyche too. But it's everything that animates that persona and informs that, all those things. In order for something to come from Kether to Malkuth, it has to pass through that Ruach. And it's the same thing. Any information that comes through us has to pass through our Ruach. It has to pass through our persona, through our psyche, our soul. And in that process, if you have not learned to set yourself aside, you will taint the message with your personality. The filter of you will color the message. And I feel like in people like Steiner and in people like Blavatsky and, the whole slew the whole Muppet show that happened after her with Leadbeater and Annie Besant and all these people. I think a lot of that um, was ego aggrandizement and allowing the Ruach to really, I mean, if it wasn't outright delusion, which I think it was in 70% of the cases, if it was an outright delusion, then the Ruach, the personal self was filtering the message. And this is uniformly a danger, a risk, and a challenge in every tradition.
So the Chaldean Oracles, were they trained not to taint the message with their personality? Like, where do they derive their insights? Like, how
Well, we
would
don't have the Chaldean oracles. Like I said, we have the fragments of it.
well, the fragments
One of the fragments,
and what makes them so significant?
says something like that. Change not the barbarous names of evocation.
Hmm.
Don't change this shit. Don't alter this system, particularly the barbarous names, right? The onomata barbara.
What is a barbarous name?
It's essentially a bunch of vowels punctuated by the occasional consonant. And it's Dr. Shaw talks about a lot of this stuff. He makes sense of it in his latest book, uh, um, man, it's escaping my name. I have it right here on my bookshelf. Hellenic Tantra, I think it's called. Yeah, Hellenic Tantra. And he talks. He really deals with the onomata barbara, the barbarous names, which were meant to really institute a state of supra rational trance, essentially. But the thing with the Chaldean oracles is that they're giving context. They're giving a lot of context in this stuff, in that talking about how the world is formed out of mind and talking about the different elements. And we get a lot of the interpretation, a lot of this stuff from people like Iamblichus and, other Neoplatonists. I believe Porphyry, they talk about the Chaldean oracles and that kind of stuff and others, and they give us the essential commentary from that stuff. But and that's the whole thing is even if you look at the pyramid texts, right? Isadora Forrest is really good at talking about this. She had a really, really great essay in one of the light extended volumes called I Wear the Cloak of the Great Lady, I Am the Great Lady. And it's the kind of, we use the assumption of God forms in a way where we're able to attenuate the force and not be ridden by the force, not be completely overcome by the force, but to embody it and to I would say, hold in a very talismanic way some portion of its power while we execute something ritualistically, symbolically. On the other hand, when you look at the pyramid text, they seem to be full-scale invocations and that identification with the god. Now, a lot of this stuff, the reason, it culminates in an ecstatic state. From the Greek ekstasis, to stand outside, to stand outside of yourself. Right? That's essentially what's supposed to happen. You are pushed to the side. You are standing outside. The god is the vessel. It's the same thing with the barbarous names. You're achieving a heightened state of a supra-rational state of consciousness. And it's in that moment that we are able to receive a pure, or at least the purest form of communication, insight, whatever it is. Contact, communion, it's the purest form that we can have while in a body. It's not going to be perfect. They allude to a lot of these things, but the truth is, first of all, a ton of this shit was lost, obviously. And a lot of it was, a lot of these people they weren't dialoguing with guys like me and you. These things were written to exchange in trained priestcrafts, a lot of the time, trained philosophical systems. And a lot of this stuff wasn't written down, but it certainly points to it. It certainly alludes to it, if not talking about it in the vernacular I'm using. I'm sure if you found somebody even more well-versed in the Platonic stuff, in the Hermetic stuff than me, they could call to mind maybe 5 or 6 different instances where this is the case. You even look at Pymander, right? Or Discourse on the Eighth and the Ninth. Discourse on the Eighth and Ninth is perfect. The officiating priest, he's telling his acolyte or son or what, the lower guy on the totem pole, his apprentice. He's telling him, you are going to pray with all your might, offer up the sweetest, the best prayer that you can give, and be sincere, and I am going to go into vision. And so he goes into vision, and he starts talking about flames and lights and words, and he says, words fail me, I can't describe it. So a lot of this stuff is, they're at least pointing to this idea of it's indescribable, and a lot of it shouldn't be described. It can't be described, and it shouldn't be described. I think that's perfectly in line with the idea that I've had some sort of revelation, and I'm gonna now go light it on fire to the world. Fine, go ahead, go do stuff. Do stuff in your personal life. Execute in your microcosm and your sphere of availability, your sphere of influence. Execute what you can, but that's still, the locus is in you. What do I have to do? It's not what I have to change in the world, is what am I doing? Not how is the world changing. That's not how. There's no end time prophecies. There's no, needing to talk about, give definite names to certain things. We have enough. We have a tremendous wealth of terms for the dark forces and the light forces in the world. I don't need to go call something fucking Ahriman and start talking about Lucifer and confuse everyone. There's light and there's dark, and I understand those. He pulled those out of previous traditions. Zoroastrianism for Ahriman, Angra Mainyu, and obviously Lucifer from the Christian tradition and the Hebrew tradition, or Judeo-Christian tradition. But the thing is, he's assigning these new meanings to them, and kind of putting them together eclectically, syncretically, and I would argue even arbitrarily. Why can't we just talk about them? Why can't we just talk about light and darkness? So it's in that way, it takes away from the prophetic overtone, right? When things become like prophetic, when they become specific, but when you leave them universal, well, yeah, now I can apply this stuff, light and dark. It's the same, you know what I'm saying? Okay, I can work with it. Why do we need to now make things into prophecies? That's where we go wrong with this shit over and over again.
Two of my favorite chapters in your book were the spiritual rebirth chapter and the invisible brotherhoods, which they kind of go hand in hand. I mean, it all does, which is why it's an amazing book. It just kind of strings it all together. But so spiritual rebirth would kind of indicate that there was a spiritual death at one point, or I just wanted to ask you about, like, to get your I want to get you to elaborate on that whole thing. Like, what is it that's being rebirthed? And because we could say spiritual, but that's like super vague. But yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, really, the reason why I use the word rebirth is because that's what Renaissance means. And when I'm referring to what I'm referring to in that book is the Renaissance.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I'm not just talking about the Renaissance in terms of like, oh yeah, it was a great time and all this cool art came out of it. I'm pointing to why the Renaissance happened, right? Starts in Florence, starts with Cosimo de' Medici and guys like Ficino, the lesser known but equally as important Lodovico Lazzarelli. These guys in Italy of the time, they really wealth, business acumen, mundane power always has a part to play. because without Cosimo de' Medici, we probably would not have been able to secure, at least at that time, the entire Platonic corpus and the entire corpus Hermeticum and all the Neoplatonic stuff. He was the guy who had the money that could pay people to go search for these things and bring them to him. And then he could also pay the guy who was going to translate all this shit. So, but so from his wealth and making good use of his wealth and his power and influence, he essentially allows lost wisdom to re-enter into the literate world of Europe. And so what happens is there becomes it's, and it's reductive, but it's the only way we can really talk about these things without having to, diverge into a 2-hour history lesson on this little corner of history. But there does become what I would say a dearth of, or a lack of, spiritual and therefore cultural inspiration. People make a lot of mistakes. We call the Middle Ages the Dark Ages, because it was a product of the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and all of the infrastructure and institutions and education that came with that. And so the last bastion of this kind of institutional organization was the Catholic Church. And again, it reaches its apogee and corruption, as most things do when they hit that cycle of wealth and power. People start becoming very human very quickly. And it creates a kind of, at least in parts of Europe, it creates what we consider to be, a cultural death more so than just a spiritual one. I think the farmer who's praying to Christ with all their soul and all their might and lighting a candle every night, that person has just as much
That was a
spiritual.
nice poem.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even realize, but that person has just as much spiritual power to me as any highfalutin toga wearing fucking theurgist.
Yeah.
But there was certainly, I would say, a cultural death that came from a spiritually arid culture, religious culture. And we all know it. It's a truism, right? All that stuff. But people make a lot of mistakes. They tend to lump everything into the Dark Ages. Like, a lot of people, I wrote about it in the book, a lot of people don't realize, like, the witch burnings took place in the Renaissance. The witch trials, everybody thinks it's like, it's a product of this shit can happen anytime. There's witch trials been going on here for you know what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about literal witches, but I'm talking about the people become possessed by a spirit of zeal, which is ultimately the thing that they see and don't like in other people.
Yeah.
And that gets really out of hand really quickly, especially when you have an institution like the church or the mass media telling you that you're right. Go and do it. Go and burn them. Go and find them. Go and, So we see that happening even during the Renaissance. But there certainly was a bit of a cultural monoculture, and I think a lot of that had to do with the ascendancy of the Catholic Church and what it did to those traditions by outlawing them and allowing people to loot and sack the temples of Theurgy, the pagan temples, and not tolerating their existence, not attempting to integrate what they're doing into their own worldview, because ultimately the earliest Christian, cults are an outcropping of Greco-Egyptian Hebraicized theurgy. So it's actually the same thing. It's just, once they get state sponsorship via Rome, then they're just kind of like, all right, they take on the Roman spirit, which is us and no one else. Rome first, us and no one else. It adopts really the spirit of the empire, which it didn't have before then. They're extremely oppressed, fed to lions, they were raped, they were burnt, they were crucified. We're talking about a very very quiet mom and pop type of thing, and then they become bigger than Coca-Cola in historically what could be considered, what can be analogized to almost overnight. And yes, of course, the people that they put in power lose their goddamn minds. So what happens? There's a monoculture, and we suffer a severe cultural death. Now, here's the thing: a lot of those wisdom texts, Platonic stuff, the Hermetic stuff, they remain as legends, legendary texts. People don't stop talking about Hermes Trismegistus. People don't stop talking about Plato. As a matter of fact, you will find that many of the clerics that were, you know, doctors of the church, intellectuals, they were actually obsessed with Platonizing Christianity and finding ways to fit, but they didn't have all the texts, and they certainly didn't have all the context. So what this did was it enabled what the reintroduction of these specifically these texts, the Corpus Hermeticum, the Platonic corpus, and the attendant Neoplatonic literature. It allows people to finally see what they're saying, put it all in context. You didn't have people coming out, and there was very few people, major players. You had Gemistus Platon, who was, a strict polytheist. He rejected Christianity, but other than that, most of the major players, Marsilio Ficino, even Ludovico Lazzarelli, Athanasius Kircher, Johannes Reuchlin, go down the list of all the guys. They saw Christianity they recognized it. They actually, without knowing it, saw the blueprint that, yes, early Christianity is just an extension of this stuff. It's the soteriological answer to these dilemmas, these ontological and existential dilemmas. There's a dilemma here. The soul is in a fallen state. How is the soul rectified? Theurgy, was an answer. And that comes with all sorts of practices. Theophagia, theomorphia, prayer, all that stuff, agalma, all of these techniques. But ultimately it culminates in the Christ event. And it just, after probably 300, 400 years, it just gets completely corrupt. And then, certainly is 1,000 years later. But they're still talking about these things, and there's still little flickers, little glimmers of the tradition that was our heritage, that got us here. It's like becoming, I don't know. There's something to be said, right? The man who grows old and forgets his youth becomes a monster. And Christianity did the same thing. It grew old and it shut out its youth. It shut out where it came from, and it became a monster.
Mm.
And so the reintroduction of these texts allowed most of the the literate people that were working in these spiritual traditions, the great philosophers of the day and age, to recognize where it came from. And so from this, I mean, it just sets Europe on fire creatively, imaginatively, with passion. Light comes into the West again after the fall of Rome, and art is inspired, reinterpretations of art, literature, poetry, Dante's Inferno, which is a theurgic event, it's just ascending through the spheres into the Ogdoad, which, or beyond the Ogdoad, into what they call the Empyrean, right? The mind of God, the noetic realm of the theurgists. It's all the same shit, but people start talking about it poetically and producing art based on this, based on theurgy and ascent and the old forms of it. And that's what we look back and we say, oh my God, how did they do it? They were geniuses. Well, they were plugged into this shit.
Yeah.
This was the stuff that was creating a new era and making every art, every human endeavor pregnant with beauty and meaning and passion. And so that's why I called it, a rebirth.
I think one of the biggest deals for me, and probably to many people that could be appreciated, is the Rosicrucians and their relation to the Reformation and what that meant for the Western world. Like that seems like just a giant impactful thing that is like an undercurrent that most people are just not aware of unless they're researching this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's it's pretty like crazy to me. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what that scenario was and how things shifted um culturally and religiously and what kind of impact that had on the Western world and the relation to the Rosicrucians and all that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Protestantism in general was, you know, uh, I would say it was probably one of the top 10 world events in world history was the advent of a new um I want to say secular. That's what I want to say. It's a new secular church because you have the breakup between the Eastern and Western forms of Christianity in those churches. They're highly mystical. They're highly magical. You know, they operate with the same vernacular as the ancient theurgists. You know, the pneuma and logoi and logos and all that kind of stuff. You know, they use the same. They talk about it the same way. Protestantism presents as almost a secular version of Christianity. There's very little magic. There's very little connection to the ancient past, either in memory or in deed. And I think that the fact that that was able to happen by way of Martin Luther and King Henry VIII, that these events were able to take place is no small feat. No small feat. I think it it began the trend of secularization in the West. Is really what it is. So and it's a religion. It's a form of Christianity, which is what's insane about it. But if you follow the trail of history, it's Protestantism that paves the way for total secularism because it allows it boils faith down to something, I would say, emotional and intellectual. And it is no longer something mystical. It removes the mystical component from it, removes the magical component from it in a lot of ways too. Right? The transubstantiation is not really a thing. It's symbolic. It's not literal. The same way that it is in the the high masses of the other churches. But that and a lot of other things. But I think that the Rosicrucians, obviously you look, the whole thing, there's a problem when we say the Rosicrucians, is that there were no Rosicrucians. It was considered by most to be a literary hoax. And not only that, but even if it wasn't, we don't know who those guys were. We have no clue who they were because they said explicitly we're anonymous. Like they essentially presented us with the quandary that if one were to affirm they were a Rosicrucian, it would unequivocally mean that they weren't.
Yeah.
You will never know who we are. So if I tell you I'm a Rosicrucian, it means that I'm not a Rosicrucian. So we don't know, really. They say Johann Valentin Andre, he admitted to writing The Chemical Wedding, which is completely different in tone and style than the first two Rosicrucian manifestos. They were completely different. Might he have had something to do with those by way of the scholars at Tübingen? Absolutely. But we can't, we like to just reduce everything to a very comfortable position. It's likely not the case, but people just run with it. Yeah, he did all three of them. It's likely not the case. So we have a group of scholars that are anonymous for the most part. There's one guy who's up front, and you know what he says about about the chemical wedding? He calls it a plaything. It was a plaything. I was, and so we don't really know. We don't really, yeah, there's, I'm sure there's plenty of Masons out there listening, to this and being like, well, that's what we say, there's plausible deniability, all this stuff, but you don't know. You don't know. You don't know for a fact. So you can't even really begin to talk about the Rosicrucians without saying that, like, we don't know if that group ever actually existed. But what's significant is that the Rosicrucians they really hyped up this newfound hermetic, alchemical, and Neoplatonic stuff. And the fact that they were like anonymously issuing manifestos that were saying like, we're this spiritually enlightened brotherhood, and the claim was made later on, really, that but for the most part it was there since the Confessio. We're going to initiate the world, and we're going to have a new revolution, spiritual revolution. So that captivates the mind of a lot of young and a lot of ambitious intellectuals of the time. And that's another time, right, where this old information, these ancient texts are reintroduced in a different way, right? Because you have Marsilio Ficino and you have Ludovico Lazzarelli, and they're translating the stuff, but they're scholars and they're translators. And they're saying, yeah, Ficino makes the New Platonic Academy and he's doing fun stuff. Ludovico Lazzarelli says, I am a Hermeticist and a Christian. But you don't act, that doesn't, it doesn't smack of the true vine. Yeah, you guys found this stuff and you translated it, and now you're doing some sort of cosplay. That's how it can come across. I'm not saying that's what they did, but you have an anonymous group of initiates saying like, we hold the old wisdom and we will initiate the world with it. Now it's like there's more stakes. There's, the stakes are higher. There's more on the table here. And so young men kind of clamored. Elias Ashmole is a great example. They clamored to be included in those ranks because they wanted the real thing. They wanted the real thing. And they didn't know who these people were. They were hidden behind a curtain. So what does that do? Well, it creates what Francis Yates has referred to as the Rosicrucian furor, where people go nuts. And so, yeah, they start creating, whether the Rosicrucians actually existed, indeed, in fact, it doesn't even matter. No. Really, almost, because it did what it said it was going to do in the first place. It created a revolution. It created a Rosicrucian movement.
Yeah.
So the thing with that is now it's no longer concentrated. It's decentralized. Of course, the people that are operating in that movement, that greater movement, that are participating with one another on the intellectual scene, they have certain things in common. But I would say that each person probably had a slightly different interpretation of what Rosicrucianism was. And so by now, in the present day, you run into a whole gamut of different types of Rosicrucianism, some of which disavow Christianity, or at least put it which is insane. But it just doesn't make sense. It's a logical fallacy. It's just something that people want to do because they feel more comfortable outside of that program. But it's like, I'm not driving a car because I have something made of cardboard and a few wheels because I'm not comfortable in being in a car. It's not the real thing. It doesn't matter whether or not you're comfortable with it. This is the real deal, and you've created something that you're comfortable with, but they're not the same. So it's just not. So that's the issue with Rosicrucianism. But I find, to answer your question finally, the most interesting thing for me is that they were poised between two extremes. I feel that they fought. They embodied a Protestant ethos, which was typical of the region from which Rosicrucianism claims to have sprouted, right? Germany. They certainly operated on a Protestant ethos. They espoused those kind of ultimately secularizing views of egalitarianism and this kind of new scientific enlightenment, sure, but they also rejected the lacking mystical component. They rejected Protestantism for its lack of mysticism, mysticality, if you want to call it, its lack of sacred magic, of sacramental ritual, sacramental theology. They fought against that because what did they do? Well, they incorporated magic and alchemy and astrology back into all this stuff. So they really were interesting because on one hand, they embraced and brought forward the Protestant ethos, but on the other hand, they completely fought against it, like almost as if the jacket were too tight and I got to bust out of this thing.
Mhm.
You know, so yeah, they are very interesting. One of the most interesting and clearly enigmatic parts of the history.
Yeah. It's just to me it's amazing and inspiring. It's like this rogue dissemination of information, but like not spammy. Like it's like value and it's like a gift. Whoever, it doesn't matter, Rosicrucians, whatever, whoever's behind trickling this information and like seeding these ideas into the society, like it's the effect that it had and the fact that it was organized in such a way and there were people that were I mean that was like an act of uh that was like a it was like a gift, like it was like
Hmm.
a thing you would do. It wasn't something that would anyone who was doing for profit or for um gain or ego or
Certainly not.
anything like that. It was like it was just like what was the right thing or like what they were like something that represents a battling bad ideas with better ideas
Hmm.
and yeah, you know what I mean?
I do. And that's ultimately we talk about earlier about how do you know when you're, you know, how do you know the difference between, doing the work like a spiritual mission and then like running wild uh with this, personal gnosis stuff and putting it out there in the world. Well, I think I'm a pretty good example of that. I didn't get involved in a lot of this. I was brought to this stuff synchronistically. I did not know what magic was. When I found out what these orders were doing, I laughed at them. I was a no call, no show to my first initiation. I didn't sit here like, okay, yeah, I need to be initiated into these cryptic societies. So I didn't give a shit, to be perfectly honest with you. I was young and I think in a lot of ways, the less you want it, the more fit you are to have it.
Mhm.
That's kind of like this weird thing about the universe. It's almost like a trick or a hack or this weird law that looks differently than the way it operates. In order to get the thing that you want, you have to let go of it, at least a little. Um, it, at least to be able to wield it. People who go after what they want, no matter what, and they use that will and they force the issue, they typically end up crashing and burning at a certain point. Those are not typically happy endings. Whereas when you follow the synchronicities, when you communicate with your environment, so to speak, when you're in touch with something higher spiritually, whether you can define it or not, whether you realize it or not, you are brought to the gate of that kind of development and that work. And then from there, I feel, what is my spiritual mission? My spiritual mission is to come here in a time such as now and to not give you Ike's interpretation, Ike's new dispensation, but to look back and say, look at what we have. We've already got it. We've already got it. Why aren't we paying attention to it?
Yeah.
That's the real issue. Why are we cherry picking? Why are we picking apart this fucking the corpse of the esoteric past and just selecting the juiciest bits, the ones that fit our taste. This little scrumptious bit, I don't like that part over there. You know what I'm saying? You dismember this thing like Osiris. You Osirify the mysteries and stick them in little boxes and send them along down the Nile. And then nobody has any clue, what we're doing or why. And then what happens? We are left with a postmodern value system. We are left with a postmodern perspective filter. Our paradigm is postmodern. Therefore, we are going to interpret everything we encounter through that lens, whether consciously or not. And so now you're throwing out the parts of the tradition that are meant to influence your worldview. They are meant to correct they are meant to guide your worldview, and you're throwing them away. And what are you left with? You are left with a nihilistic, postmodern, positivistic, reductionist, amoral fucking philosophy. And you are going to crash and burn playing with magic under that kind of delusion, under those kinds of circumstances. And so my whole thing is to just point back and say, do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. You're pulling this thing apart. I'm going to do my best to tape it back together and sit it back on where it belongs. So that kind of work, I think, I feel that I'm working in tandem with the initiates of the past. I don't care about trailblazing a future. I have no desire to go, I am come to turn the wheel of the law. Here is the new dispensation. Who the fuck am I? Who the fuck are you? We've got it. We've got it. And if we want to improve, then we follow spirit to the door it leads us. And that means saying, I was wrong. Making the cosmic apology and saying, guide me. I will follow. I will go. I will trust. And it's not this huge grandiose thing all the time. A lot of times it's just like, going back to school. It's because you don't know. You're never going to be able to see that far down the line objectively in your own life. So you don't know what kind of impact you're going to have. Do you think a lot of these people think that we would be talking about them 2,500 years later? Or like, Justin Sledge would be on talking about some weird, obscure fucking, I don't know, magician painter from the 1100s. The guy never thought that somebody on a computer screen is going to be talking about me one day. You can't see it. But if you act in flow, you'll end up where you need to be. And a lot of times that will contradict where you want to go, as it did for me in particular. I wanted to be a musician. Okay. That's what I wanted to do with my life. And here I am. But it's the interesting thing for me is that is part of the Rosicrucian ethos, right? The Rosicrucians believe in a chain of initiation. By the River Jordan, did we sit down and weep? Talking about the lineages of the past and how the Rosicrucians we're just this era's initiates. And it's not our job to change the law. It's not our job to change the barbarous names of evocation. It's our job to act as a chain of transmission. That's all it is. Hold the line. Initiate worthy successors. Transmit the doctrine untouched. We don't need to add personal flair and panache. This is what it is. How do we know? Because it's been given to us and we've worked the system.
How different was Martin Luther's thoughts or ideas versus the Rosicrucian thoughts and ideas?
Well, Martin Luther, so at least what is commonly understood about him is known by way of religious history and theology, having different theological ideas, a lot of which, stemming from, well, what you would call like, sola fide, we're saved by faith alone type of I mean, that's a huge part of the early discrepancy between Protestantism, Catholicism, Orthodoxy. Capital O Orthodoxy, the Orthodox Church per se, rather than the lowercase o Orthodoxy, of meaning, the practices that the East and West have in common and their general beliefs. But so there's that kind of thing. We don't know what type of Christianity the Rosicrucians subscribed to. We don't know for fact. We know that they were Christians. We know that they were Christians. But we also know that they did not exclude wisdom on the basis of its location of origin, location of residence. They worked with Brethren of the East. They worked with Arabic brethren, in order to accumulate and translate and preserve the wisdom of the world, the spiritual tradition of the world. So I would say that that's probably antithetical to Martin Luther. He probably would not have cared to learn astrology. He probably would not have cared to learn very deeply the Hermetic arts like alchemy. Maybe he did. He never wrote about it. We don't really know. I think it's a safe to bet that he didn't. So I would say that what we're talking about here are less people and more movements. And movements are influenced by many people and long periods of time. Long, relatively. 100 years, 200 years, not a long time in the span of history. But relative to, being a human being and living your life and having several generations to look back on, 200 years, 300 years, it's a long time. And the Rosicrucian movement developed, the Protestant movement developed, especially here in America. It was a frontier, really. The entire country was a frontier. They'll lie to you, or they'll at least exclude the information that this place was at least in part a penal colony. They sent people here that were ousted, that had broken the law. A lot of it was Cromwell's law, so very unjust. But either way, Christianity turns into a whole other seven-headed monstrous hydra in America because there's nobody here to tell them no. Some guys are like, I can interpret the Bible, and starts going from town to town like a snake oil salesman and say, Lord has given me, but that's another, it's more of what I was talking about before. The Lord has given me this dispensation. It's like, okay, all right. And so now entire sects of Christianity in the United States are based off of, some asshole's great-grandfather who got tired of selling shoes, and he became a Bible salesman and a preacher. So there are movements that change, and a lot of people in long periods of time. I would say what the Rosicrucian movement has in common with the Protestant movement is the adoption of what would become positivistic science on the one hand, and essentially what we would consider Enlightenment era ideals.
Wait, hold on. So did you say the Rosicrucians are in tandem with Enlightenment ideals?
And that's to a degree, yes. And that's the conundrum behind it. It's the same thing with Freemasonry. You go into Freemasonry and it's extremely influenced by the Enlightenment, and
because
obviously they're related.
I think that's something me and you have talked about before. I think I've talked about it with Jamie too, is like a lot of the Enlightenment ideals are not so, I mean, they're not, it sounds like enlightenment, but
they're
it's
not enlightened.
Yeah.
They're not enlightened. No, well, that's the thing. It's complex to talk about historically Walter Hanegraaff does a great job in his Guide for the Perplexed, Western Esotericism. He is overwriting that with his newest work. So I don't know what he'll have to say now. But I would say that that's a really good place to get a firmer understanding of. I try to include some of that in my book. It's for context. That's not really, I'm not taking that line of examination. And that's a really good analogy, actually. So you've got somebody like Walter Hanegraaff, who's explicitly scholarly. He says that I don't practice this stuff. It's all kind of historical and all that stuff. And we have to use the tools that our education and skepticism, rational skepticism, have given us. We have to utilize those tools in order to be able to see clearly. I say yes, and yes, and yes, Professor Hanegraaff, I deeply respect you. You have influenced my work tremendously. I don't think I could write with such scholarly rigor without you, but I don't believe that this stuff is strict, can be understood. It has more dimensions than can be understood by strict positivistic skeptic. That's your job, is to be in the academy and to toe that line and to play in that enclosure. That's not my job. My job is to be out here on the forefronts of consciousness and discovering how the two relate. And that's what the Rosicrucians did, as opposed to the Enlightenment. You could look at Walter Hanegraaff as an inheritor to the Enlightenment, and you could look at me as an inheritor to the Rosicrucians. I carry both. And that is in the same way, right? I write with scholarly rigor. I defer to scholastic sources. I'm always using source material, but I'm never going to allow that to rule out the other truths.
Yeah.
And so that's what the Rosicrucians did. So that's where you wouldn't say that, I completely academic just because I share some of that. So the Rosicrucians were the same way. They shared some of the Enlightenment era ideals, but it hadn't hardened into this callous fucking,
Right.
this dull mass.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. It hadn't hardened because it's not over. I mean, you're a living example of that very point. Like, you're a Rosicrucian yourself. You're like the modern representation in some form. So it's like, there's a living.
Yep, you
there-
stuck with me, like it or not.
Yeah, that's not so bad. Okay, so do you personally have a favorite chapter that you enjoyed working on in your book that you would say like you just really loved and eh, that brought about some information or ideas that you felt happy about sharing?
The grimoire one,
And why is that?
because it's the one I was least familiar with, and it's the one where the more I read about it, the more I kind of proved my own point. Uh, and it also, the book it didn't try to dive too heavily into, like, everybody likes the grimoire stuff. Not everybody wants to hear that really the reason for the season is theurgy and the rest is kind of people going off on their own tributaries and taking their own strands based on their predilections, ulterior motives, and interests.
Yeah.
Not everybody wants to hear that, but everybody likes the grimoire tradition,
Why
because even
why
when
do
you're
people like the grimoire what is it about it that
because
they,
it's dark, it's sexy, it's even its history is, it's a little dangerous. It's the classic, what I would say, the literature we grew up with, or not literature, well, some of the literature, but some of the media, like the old movies and things like that, fantasy stuff, is the magician in his circle with the sword and the powerful words conjuring the demon, and it's a little dangerous, it's a little edgy, but he's got the power and he knows the spell and he knows what he's doing. And that's attractive to people because most of us work at fucking Payless or McDonald's, like we
yeah.
have lives of we are completely disempowered, and we see no realistic way of changing. So we creep closer daily to this escapist fantasy in one way or another. Some people do it through drugs, others through video games, and you got people out there, doing this, Sorcerer's Apprentice cosplay. But
So
then the problem is, you might go up there pretending, but you might get something real, and then you're fucked.
yeah. So okay, so like grimoires, like these are people's personal, they're like books about people's personal ways of working with spirits and stuff. Is that like what a grimoire is? Or like,
Yeah, I mean, grimoire, if you would ask somebody about 50 years ago, what's a grimoire? Somebody who knew, like older scholars of this kind of stuff, they say it's a book of magic. It's a book of techniques for magic,
so
ritual
like
magic.
I
But
guess I could see the appeal of being able to look at a lot of different grimoires, maybe could find patterns and maybe could find
yeah,
commonalities between them.
yeah, well, because there's whole grimoire traditions, right? The Solomonic tradition, following in with having the historiola on the mythos of King Solomon being a demon hunter,
Yeah.
and all that stuff. That plays a huge part. That's what Solomonic magic is. Employs the use of pentacles and the pentagram and the hexagram and certain rings and specific tools, working with angels that figure largely kabbalistically,
Yeah.
or would anyway at some point would later come to figure largely in what we practice to be the Kabbalah nowadays, but certainly having that Judeo-Christian foundation, which was even present in the PGM. As far back as the Greek magical papyri, they were using uh, Hebrew names for the angels, and they were using Christ as a name of power, Christos, and and the hero, we would say Cairo sign symbol
Oh.
is it's somewhere in the PGM, and I believe that there are the names of also some of the evangelists, and also the I believe it's the four archangels that are used most commonly in Solomonic magic. Really, there are five: Raphael, Gabriel, Uriel, Michael, and Anael. Somebody will correct me. I'm sure David Rankin knows way more about this shit than I do. But just generally, uh, it is fascinating. There are a lot of through lines and commonalities, and it is very attractive. But to your point, yes, nowadays the modern context that we have is that yes, it was mostly priests and nobilities and just people of elevated class somewhat in society that were working with outside sources uh, that were not clerically official, not officially authorized by the church. So they were rogues. That's also sexy nowadays. They were doing what
It
they
is
weren't supposed to
sexy.
be.
Yeah.
And then they were um they were summoning demons and doing angelic magic and generally working with spirits, and these were their journals, their notebooks. So a lot of stuff isn't written down in there. A lot of it isn't organized terribly well. It is generally a journal, a lot of it, and a lot of them were Christian Catholic priests. And the
Who's
interesting
the Saint Cyprian thing? Is that like one of the guys? There's like
no,
this.
Cyprian is older than that. Cyprian was a pagan who was basically a pharmakos, a magician. And he converted to Christianity very early on. And actually, Rome condemned him to die because he converted to Christianity. And his last words were, "Thanks be to God." And that's the most badass. They fuck those other guys. That's badass. You are
Yeah.
condemned to die. Thanks be to God. I remain a true Christian. Um, and I will die for that principle. And yeah, he's a lot of times when people convert to Christianity from being in the occult, they will take on Cyprian as their patron saint.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then there was Marina, Saint Marina, who was born into a she was born into a pagan family, but was persecuted heavily by them and by the society she grew up in, because from a very young age she had a vision of Christ and wanted to be a Christian. And although she wasn't raised by Christians, she wasn't influenced by them. So that's another one. Some women who convert take on Marina as a patron saint as well, from this path of occultism. But the interesting thing, the point of the book kind of is that you don't really have to. If you know what if you
Yeah.
understand what's going on, you don't need to choose one or the other.
Yeah.
You know,
So are there like any theurgic grimoires?
there are um there are books that call themselves, Theurgia Goetia and things
Mhm.
like that. But you know, I don't see that as traditional theurgy. For instance, I could write a book that calls something, I don't know. I could use a term inappropriately, which I have before. I probably have. It's just that's the way that I understand the term, and I happen to have used it outside of the bounds of its traditional, uh, you know, description based on traditional practices, the practices that the word grew out of. So you'll see some Theurgia Goetia and stuff like that, and Jake Stratton Kent and Danny Newman kind of point to it. Jake Stratton Kent, much more so, he'll talk about, well, here's the proof. Goetia is Theurgic. You know, Not really. Uh, but you can, if you see it in a grimoire from whatever the 14th century, sure, you can get excited about it. But
Yeah.
I note this in the book. It's just like that's not what we're talking about here when we're talking about theurgy. We're not talking about making pacts with chthonic spirits in order to achieve some mundane end,
So
because
is
that's what
that
Goetia is.
okay? Yeah.
Theurgy doesn't do that. So you can call something theurgy, you can write that down on a piece of paper, and it doesn't make you right.
Yeah.
So again, this was a point of clarification that I had to make in the book. The earliest Theurgic grimoires. Now, if you're talking notebooks and notes and personal, uh, diagrams and sort of cosmological schemes that detail actual theurgy, celestial ascent for the purposes of spiritual refinement and holism and reintegration, those are going to be in the Gnostics. The
Okay.
the Ophite diagrams and the Book of Yeo, or Jehu, as some people anglicize it. Really, it's Iao, like Iao, the Gnostic Greek barbarous name, or mantra. Really, it's a
Yeah.
barbarous name, but it's onomata. But it's those, to me. That's where you're going to find theurgic grimoires. The Ophite diagrams, the Book of Ieu, though in the Bruce Codex, those are going to be some really, really cool firsthand kind of notes, diagrams, uh, canticles, psalms, things like that
S-
these people were using to actually do this ritual work.
So what would you call like Agrippa's book, three books on philosophy? Like,
I
because
would I would call them exactly what he called them. Three books on occult philosophy.
okay.
Well, because they weren't notebooks, they weren't private. There is very little actual ritual in them. Uh,
Okay.
there's some, but they're not really. A lot of it is the theory
So
and the
more
philosophy
the grimoires are more they're like they're talking about like specific rituals that are kind of
protocols.
Okay, yeah,
We're talking about protocols. They say, on the ninth day of this month in this hour of the moon,
yeah.
you are to prep yourself, bathe in milk or salt water, something like that. Say these 6 prayers. Then you are to don your robe, perform the sacramentary, sense the room, call these names. This is what the demon's name is. This is how you pronounce it. This is what has to be drawn. It's protocols. It's technique.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
So Agrippa, I know Agrippa was like, I mean, he was a pretty devout Christian, right?
very, yes.
Okay, and
But
so
like a lot of other Christians, including myself, Lodovico Lazzarelli, Marsilio Ficino, not to group myself in with them, but I'm just
yeah,
saying, I just had this whole talk about how you can be both.
yeah.
He really truly believed that you could do both. That the only way to really understand Christianity was to understand it through this lens.
Well, I was gonna ask you, why is it so hard for people to comprehend that? Like, why is it such a thing that to so many people it seems like you can't be um Christian and practice magic. Why is
Well,
that the case?
I think a lot of the people that you're talking about would say, because the Christian church says that you can't practice magic. Yeah, asshole, but you wouldn't have the grimoire tradition if people actually felt that way. If some avenue for spiritual praxis that embodied or operated under or within the Christian worldview with sincerity, essentially it boils down to 2 different types of Christian. People who are dogmatic and people who understand that Christianity is a state of being. Christianity is a sanctification of the heart. It's not whether or not some old dude cut my wiener and then dunked me in water. It has nothing to do with that. That's
So,
the that, that's human grandiosity.
yeah.
And then you get people who say, I love the Orthodox people. They basically say, um, well, who are we? Who are we to interpret this stuff if we have the writings of the saints and all this other people? And I say, well, that's fallible.
Yeah.
Those are just human beings. You can't tell me that all those people are completely infallible because the church has canonized them. And then and then they'll say, well, that it was divinely inspired. But at the other side of their fucking mouth, they're talking about how, oh, I don't believe in the Pope because he's not infallible.
Yeah.
So it's like you're talking out of your ass here. Talking out of both sides of your fucking mouth. You're not being consistent with yourself.
Yeah.
So I think that's a moot defense, and I think it's an easy cop out for people. I think people can't square the two, particularly now, because they don't like Christianity.
Hmm.
They have allowed their own experiences and 360 societal messaging to not just vilify the people, the examples, but to
Yeah.
vilify the title Christian, the word Christianity, the idea of Christianity. They want it off the face of the fucking earth, and a lot of these people are actively working in threads that are against Christianity because they see the corruption of the church as the ultimate expression of Christianity. And why? It's because we are being trained more and more that there must be an enemy and we must hate them.
It's just acting impulsively. It's just people.
It's gratifying your own biases. You have an agenda. You likely have some, and no matter what you can say, I saw somebody be beat within inches of their life because they were gay by a Christian crowd. But I can guarantee you, there is some example in that person's life of a Christian, somebody who identified as a Christian that either made them feel bad, made them feel like an asshole, or abused them. And that is the core of their issue. That person, it is eternal juvenile revenge.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
And that's the whole thing. That's sand trap. That is a sand trap. It's your you no, I don't give a fuck if you're Christian. I don't give a shit if you're Christian, if you choose to acknowledge Christ or anything. But to work under the delusion that that Christianity is totally outside the scope of occultism, because that's what it is. I mean, it's willful ignorance at that point.
Bonkers.
Is
Bonkers.
it's a level of stupidity and insanity that I find well, if I weren't a Christian, I would find it detestable.
Yeah. All right. What are, if any, some of the major takeaways you hope people to take away from your book? I mean, you talked a little bit about um the thesis of the book in the beginning. Like, what do you hope to accomplish with the publication of A Formless Fire? What is like one of the overarching messages that you hope to get across to people or demonstrate?
Well, you said exactly the word several times right there, hope.
Hmm.
I think that I put the blinders on and I dug in. I just focused on my work and I banged it out and I banged it out and I banged it out and I just kind of buried my head in the sand until I got it done. And then I went back and I tied things together a little better. It could, any work could be better than it is, right? But at a certain point, you're putting bells and whistles on a Christmas tree and you got to just walk away from it. Anything, is it music, dinner, everything. You can only fuck with it so much. So, but then I wrote the afterword almost at the same time I wrote the introduction. I was getting ideas from the introduction that I was putting that I was jotting down. It became the outline of the afterword. And the afterword is really telling you what I hope to accomplish. I hope to have demonstrated that the true vine of this is not only some weird, obscure niche history. Sorry, all you graduate students out there and people that have recently gotten their doctorates, because this is some kind of, quirky, weird, interesting field. It's really not. What it is it's the history of the West. It's the history of the world. It
Yeah.
goes it goes back to Sumer, Babylonia, the Egyptians. It dominates Western philosophy by way of Plato and the Platonists and the Neoplatonists and the Socratics and the Stoics. It's everywhere. It's in the Middle East. It's in Europe. It is responsible for the Renaissance. It is responsible for Christianity. This is our tradition. This is it. This is all there is. Everything else is kind of a byproduct. And aside from demonstrating the point, everything that generated this philosophy that creates our world in one way or another, the thing that generates it is the idea that the soul is fallen, that the soul is a perfect thing in an imperfect place and mistakes the imperfection of this realm as it being inherent to itself. And that's the dilemma. We're not, people tell you you're enough and you're it. Yes, but that's not being intellectually honest. You're not it. You can barely get out of fucking bed and drag your fat ass to the gym. You're not it. You still freak out at strangers on the road. You're not it. You still, you allow people in you're not it. Your persona has nothing to do with it. You are definitely not enough, your persona, but there's something inside you that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter, because you can become perfected by reaching out and getting in touch with the part of yourself that is perfect. It's not perfect in the way you think it is, right? Because your idea of perfection has to do with materiality, the perfect job, the perfect wife or spouse, the perfect kids, or whatever it is, what have you, the perfect outfit, the perfect podcast episode. That's none of that. Nothing that can come into manifestation has anything to do with perfection. It's always changing. What is philosophically perfect is the part of you that wasn't born, yet still lives. And theurgy is the way of reconnecting you to that thing, because that is the thing that has the experience, not you. The persona is witness to it. Ike is witness to what ultimately was experienced, but or made possible by the higher part of me, and so that perfects the person, that transmutes, renovates, drastically changes the person. you know that is what gives them the spiritual impetus, the spiritual fire, the spiritual mission. you know um and so why the fuck are we doing anything else? You have your own reasons for it, it's fine. That's my opinion. Why are we doing anything else? So uh but the main purpose of writing any of this down was to give people hope and direction, guidance that you can trust, and not just because some guy wanted to write a book and sound really interesting and use a bunch of big words. Um, and for all the people that are on the fence about this stuff, I feel like I've done a decent job at showing you how you can be a Christian, and because it only makes sense to be a Christian. It to me, looking at it, not just the spiritual trajectory, but the history. I'm talking early Christianity, pre-Nicene Christianity. It doesn't make sense to not eventuate in that form of spirituality from a Western perspective. For me, you go through the system, and you are mirroring the history of what happened from early polytheism, paganism, sophisticated ritual, philosophy, theurgy, ceremonial, and then ultimately the Christian dispensation, which is, the Christ event is the realized theurgist. It's the perfect bornless part of the self living in the material vessel, guiding its every step, its every breath, and divinizing everything around it. And so that's what I hope to do. I hope to show people that it's not left-hand path shit. It's not about your iconoclastic, inorganic counterculturalism. Occultism, true esotericism is countercultural of its essence, because it's counterintuitive for people to not be at extremes all the time. So that is inherently or organically countercultural.
So true.
It's constantly asking you not to defer to the wisdom of the world, but to transcend it, rather than saying, don't defer to the wisdom of the world, go do the opposite. That's what Crowley says. That's what the left-hand path, that's what the theistic Satanists say. They say, oh, we're going to debauch ourselves by taking part in every vice and taboo, and that will bring us light because we'll be materially free. Our will will be free to do what it pleases. And just to end it on that note, one of my favorite quotes, I don't know who the fuck said this, but man typically likes to think of himself as purchasing pleasure, when in reality he is selling himself to it.
Interesting. I think you mentioned the history of the world. Something comparable, I would say, to your book, in my personal opinion, is Manly P. Hall's The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Um, but I would say this is kind of like a refined distillation. Because I don't know if there was like a through line that Hall was aware of when he wrote that, but the through line, of theurgy in the Western esoteric tradition, it seems like that's that's the overarching point that all this is sort of driving at. And I think that the way that you weave everything together, it really demonstrates that. And I don't know. Yeah, so that's what I have to say about it. And I
I
think
appreciate
it's,
it.
like I told you, I texted you today. I told you the more I read your book, the more I appreciate it. And it's because of you just have this beautiful ability to weave all of these things in together, because we can find all these different subjects and we can look at all these different books. We can look at Freemasonry, we can look at Rosicrucianism, we can all these, to different chapters in your book, these invisible brotherhoods, you can look at alchemy, all these different things, but the through line, it seems like it's a theurgic, that's the theurgic practice. That's the thing worth extracting from all of this. And so that's what I derive, at least currently, and that's what I appreciate a lot about it. And so
Yeah,
yeah.
and I appreciate that, man. I really
Yeah.
do, because I mean, clearly there's a head nod to Manly Palmer Hall, right? Because that was the first esoteric book I ever read, was The Secret Teaching, the reader's version. Still, you I mean, a tome. It's probably double the size, if not more, the book that I wrote. But um Manly Palmer Hall was a visionary, and he was certainly somebody that was he practiced, and he was extreme for his time, and it only increased. And when you and I went to PRS and we were looking at those monographs from the 70s and 80s, he only got more erudite. I remember being with you there at the PRS library and flipping through some of that stuff, and I was like, fuck, man, he did it. But he this is my book in 3 volumes. He did it in three different volumes between 1974 and 1976. It's here, so he did get very, very erudite and connect these things later on. The Secret Teachings he was very young, and very early on, and obviously it's an extremely impressive work. And I do believe that he was stringing things together. And the thing is that I think he was just less heavy-handed than me, because a lot of scholars
Yeah.
have exercised that Ivy League tact, that very British tact where you don't want to say too much. And I am just, a fucking New Yorker. I don't care. I don't give a shit about your dinner table politics and how we need to act. I couldn't care less,
Yeah.
because it is just it's a sieve. It's slowing down the flow of realization, because the ego is too fragile to allow that bubble to burst. I don't care about how many steps there are in the fucking dance. I'm here to do one thing. Uh so but I appreciated, because he had a very American spirit, though he was Canadian. I would say he had, natively, I would say he had a very American spirit of intrepidness and uh maybe brashness to be able to go out there and put all this stuff out. He's talking about magic. He's talking about Rosicrucians at a time where, there might have been
And he
these
was a
things.
he was a virtuous person. Like you could tell from the way he spoke. Same with yourself. So
And
it's
I'm
like,
he writes about it and spoke about it constantly. He constantly talked about, like, if you're not virtuous, don't even fucking bother. Learn that first. Learn the ABCs. You got to crawl before you can walk, But everybody out here, they want to pretend. They want to pretend that they're virtuous. The shit that they say to their parents, the way that they think of other people inherently, the way that they will tell lies and feel justified in it, necessity, that their lies are necessitated, the way they lie to themselves. You're on a path towards disaster, at the worst, and at the best, nothing, no change. You will have just wasted your time. So uh yeah, I mean, it's really, really important, but there's a nod to it, and I wanted to honor him without comparing myself to him. I didn't try to do a Secret Teachings, my version. If anything, I was afraid it was going to be Arcanum the book, and that nobody was going to like it. And there's like, he already did a lot of this stuff.
yeah. But he
But
failed with nobody liking it because,
yeah,
that's
uh,
obvious already.
but I opened the book with the same dedication that Manly Palmer Hall dedicated the Secret Teachings with. This book is dedicated to the rational soul of the world, and it came to me at the last. Actually, it came to me after I had my talk with Ronnie Pontiac on
Mm.
on Arcanum, and I just look back and I feel like he and I kind of bonded over various things, but I was very touched by the connection that we both. I mean, I don't have. Ronnie was a student, he was a friend, he knew him. But Manly Palmer Hall made him feel the same way he made me feel when I read his book, and he effectively set me on the path. He was the first reliable voice I heard in the wilderness of bullshit in occultism. Somebody that could point you in the right direction and say, "Here, go." Set your feet on the path in the right way, and that's exactly what I hope to do with this book.
Is there any other points, any other additional comments that you would like to add and draw people's attention to?
Yes. Book is a massive endeavor. I wasn't just me doing this. I did a lot of the research, etc., but I owe a huge debt of gratitude to the people that made it possible and pushed me and even offered the opportunity. Jake Trayer at Prima Press, Jamie Paul Lamb, who along with Jake edited the book and looked over it and tested proof of concept with me multiple times. And Jamie wrote the foreword, which I find to be explosive. It's
Oh, it's
probably
amazing.
the most exciting part of the book. It's excellent.
Yes.
And Pat Shanahan from Tria Prima Press, who helped me with a tremendous amount of logistics, because he's an ace with a lot of that stuff. And Travis Lawrence, who did the cover art to the book, and he worked with me, like pitching me sketches and things like that. And we both found something that we really liked. I think he knocked it out of the park. It's so unique
The
and
cover is burned into my mind.
it's so interesting. There's something about it that is very symbolic in a way that I think neither he nor I really fully understand intellectually. But I love that, and I don't want to think too much about it. And to you, Sky, for proofreading and being there with me every step of the way, really being just as much a part of this book, and at this point every book I've written, right, because I've got another one and you did all the illustrations, so you've been a huge part of this journey, and I love you and I appreciate you. And the last thing that I want to say is it is available on Amazon. We prefer that if you are not international and you can get the book in the United States from triaprima.com, do so, please. We'll include a link to where you can buy it, because we see pennies on the dollar with Amazon. Of course, Jeff Bezos making all that money for all of my work. So if you can, please buy it directly from Tria Prima.
Heck yeah. Awesome. This was a blast. I appreciate you. I'm super stoked. I have my one copy. I'm gonna be buying probably like three more of them for personal reasons, but
You're gonna hand them out to people on the street.
yeah. But awesome, cool. And if anybody wants to check out more of yourself, they can obviously go to the Arcanum YouTube channel with a V. If they want to check out my podcast, Philosophical Minds. And is there anything else you want to throw out there?
When's this going up?
Let's aim for Monday.
Okay, August 17th and 18th, I'm speaking at the Vermont Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn Conference. Kirk White, Dave Newman, Chick and Tabby Cicero are going to be there speaking with me, giving workshops in person. September 5th, I'm speaking at the Creative Bridges Conference, put on by Eurotas at Oxford University. High privilege for anybody that may or may not listen to this and is going to be over in London and the greater Oxford area. I'll be there. I'm going to be stopping in at Watkins Books as well.
Nice.
I will be there probably several times over that weekend. If you can catch me there, swing by. I'm going to go say hello to Carl over there. I have September 27th and 28th, I'm the keynote speaker at the Esotericism and Freemasonry Conference in Seattle, Washington. That's put on by Brother Troy Sprue. It's in its 8th year. It's a fantastic, fantastic conference. I'm giving a presentation, but I'm also delivering a workshop. Saturday is the day that is open to the public. Saturday and Sunday will be open to Freemasons. Uh, PD Newman is also going to be there. Jamie Lamb is giving a workshop, and Nate Schick is also going to be there. So it's a whole Tria Prima lineup. We're the
Nice.
authors.
That's awesome.
Finally, the New Hermopolis Conference is absolutely 110% happening. October 24th to the 27th in at the New Hermopolis Village in Minya, Egypt. Dr. Aaron Cheek is currently finishing up our website. It looks fantastic. It has our on-site and digital programs. For $90, go to the link that we put here. It's a Patreon. Get yourself a 3-day or an all-access pass. It will essentially give you 5 or 6 days worth of lectures that you will be available for you to stream from the comfort of your own living room or wherever it is you consume that kind of stuff. So $90, that's it. It will not be up on my YouTube. It will not be up on my Patreon. It will not be up on this is your only time that you're going to set eyes on this material. So for $90, I think it's a steal. Walter Hanegraaff, Greg Shaw, Shannon Grimes, Aaron Cheek, Mark Vernon, Soledad Davies, Jamie Lamb, Carl Hayden Smith, Robert Gordon, Ian Gladwin, Marlena Seven Bremner, Ronnie Pontiac. We've got a huge lineup of players and presenters. You're going to want to be a part of this. So just go and sign up at the link in that we put in the about section.
Awesome. And then also your Patreon right now, are you doing some kind of Theurgy series? I just watched one the other day that was amazing. So I don't know. I would definitely draw attention for people for that because that's
Yeah. Well, it's certainly high value. Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm going through the principles and core literature of theurgic initiation. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm following and if you don't know, there's not enough time here for me to explain it. Go look it up. We are following the Iamblichian curriculum of the Platonic dialogues. That's 12 dialogues. I'm going to throw in some other dialogues and some snippets from the Republic and things like that for context. But it's going to be around 12 to 15 sessions at $15 a pop. For an hour and a half to 2 hours, I'm going to give you a presentation with slides. We're going to go tackle one of these dialogues at a time, see how it relates in depth to theurgic initiation, not just theoretically, but practically. I'll be able to really elucidate a lot of what happens, what are the experiential components, how do you experience initiation, and it's all in the Platonic dialogues. So combined with my own, having gone through a lot of this
yeah.
stuff. So there's going to be a bunch of sessions. The next one is August 25th. We covered the first Alcibiades last month. This month we're moving on to the Gorgias. So get yourself a copy, read it, and sign up on my Patreon shop. It's $15 for an hour and a half to 2 hours. I lecture with slides, but then you can also, there's a Q&A afterwards. So you'll be able to ask me questions in real time.
Sweet. Yeah, it's amazing. It's like you can't find that anywhere else, what you're doing on there. So highly recommend that for people. It's something I'm super excited about. And yeah. So in closing, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. This was
Appreciate
amazing
you.
as usual. And yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up and till next time.
Till next time.
All right. Farewell.